So I literally just now read an email about this psychoanalysis of fascism. Um, Jonathon Littell subjects a memoir by Leon Degrelle, who was Belgium's highest-ranking Nazi collaborator and fanatical SS officer fighting on the Eastern Front, admired by Hitler and Mussolini. Uh, He subjects Leon Degrelle's memoir, The Russian Campaign, to a forensic reading, um, bringing it in confrontation with the renowned writer on psychology and fascism, Klaus Thewellit, sorry about that German name, who provides an afterword to the book. Little dissects Degrelle's prose to expose what he terms, quote, an anatomy of fascist discourse, a recurring set of metaphors, obsessions, and psychic structures through which fascist ideology understands the body, violence, purity, and the enemy. Um, so this is something I pointed out to in a live stream interview I did with I can't remember her name now. This was like 3 years ago, I think, and she's Eritrean. She had a political um podcast on YouTube with another YouTuber. Um, and she discovered my work through Alison McDowell. And anyway, she went back to school for a master's degree, and I've emailed her. I emailed her a few times after that, following up on the Netflix documentary about Indra Puharich, and I never heard back from her, so I'm not gonna email her anymore. But anyway, um, but I pointed out to her how, like, if you listen to Drumpf, the Drumpf cult or fascism, they are obsessed with the word disgusting. They'll say everything's disgusting. And there was actually a study on political views that the like far right political views they're basically like really easily stressed out. And so they've discovered that there's this what's like a dopamine reaction where they're stuck in the dopamine stressed out mentality, and that's why they easily find everything disgusting and they're obsessed with dirtiness and smelly things smell bad, um and they're in contrast, they must be pure and clean or whatever. um but I think that the US like fascist cult, it's now a global phenomenon, but it's trying to be, basically. But I think it's symptomatic of what David F. Noble called the religion of technology, and it's been going on since it really started with Ronald Reagan, the Reagan Revolution, which was a something that I experienced when I was in high school. But it's really about corporate culture taking over. Like, I remember being in high school, and suddenly, like, a significant portion of the students suddenly got diagnosed to have some kind of brain disease, and they got put on psychotropic, big pharma medication. And if you look at, it's only in the United States and New Zealand that big pharma is allowed to have television infomercials where they're like bombarding people with these big pharma propaganda. And as I mentioned recently, um there's now science studies showing that psychiatry is literally controlled by big pharma. Like over half of the psychiatrists get money. They get some kind of benefits, freebies or whatever from big pharma drug companies. And obviously, if you're supposed to be doing science, and then like the creator of childhood depression, clinical childhood depression, was literally secretly getting like millions from big pharma while at Harvard, and he wasn't the only one. There was like two or three other Harvard psychiatrists. They were the top of their field, and not just childhood depression, but also like ADHD and the autism spectrum or whatever. And of course, the Asperger syndrome was taken out of the DSM manual, and Hans Asperger literally was a Nazi collaborator, and he would, like, if he couldn't control a child, he would say they have autism and then send them off to literally get killed by the Nazis. And so that's another phenomenon you see in the what I call the religion of technology with David F. Noble, as David F. Noble described it. It's not just like the fascist cult, but it's basically this idea that technology will save us. So there's been this big renaissance of nuclear power for AI, for data centers. And like I mentioned before, there's like 60 companies that are supposedly going to create more nuclear power, or getting funding to do it. And that's not just a like right wing position. That's a liberal progressive position now, is to be pro nuclear power. And despite the fact that nuclear power, like, they need to clean up all the pollution they've already created, um, which is the uranium mining, the tailings of uranium polluting all over, the nuclear weapon testing, the radiation, the depleted uranium weapons that are still being used and creating two-headed babies, and then the nuclear waste that's still being created, and the nuclear fuel rods that are increasingly cracking in the nuclear power plants, and therefore leaking tritium. And it just goes on and on. And so the nuclear industry is like inherently, corrupt if you look into it. But most people, they just get taken in by the corporate propaganda. So you have essentially what's corporate culture in the U.S. empire. And understandably, most people, they don't want to question the corporate culture, because they think the billionaires are creating all the jobs. But that's not how economics works. You need a strong middle class to buy the products. But if you look at the economy as a whole, as Stephen Keen points out, the economics is like all wrong. I mean, he's an economics professor in Australia, and I actually corresponded with him on YouTube a few times. But so he's been focusing on the AI bubble that's gonna burst. But essentially, you have this accumulation of privatized debt. So people they're trying to brown nose the rich, and meanwhile they're just increasing. First, they increased the military budget under the Reagan Revolution, doubled the military budget, and then doubled the debt. And Stephen Keen, he's not against government spending, but he's just saying that you have to do government spending that actually reinvests in the real economy. And he points out, the real economy is from ecology, and the cost of global warming is much, much worse than people realize. And of course, now, like this year, we're like, now that Europe Europe has had such a bad I don't know, like I think England, the UK's had like 5 heat waves now or something like that, and the fires, of course, in Spain and France and Greece and I mean, the heat wave in Germany, it's so bad now that people cannot ignore how bad it is. But of course, the US does a really impressive job of ignoring how bad the global warming, the ecological crisis is. I mean, it's not on the news, like not even on the it's barely even on the liberal corporate media, like MSNBC and whatever, CNN. I don't watch CNN, but anyway, so like I think that the I called this imperial implosion in 1996. That was the term I dubbed it, imperial implosion. And essentially, you have the US empire has 800 military bases in other countries. And as we overspend, as an empire, you overspend on the military. And so you try to keep the empire expanding, but you can't do that because you cannot control the rest of the world, even though obviously that's what the US is trying to do. And so then while you're spending all this money on the periphery of the empire, then the domestic population implodes, and so then they try to enslave their domestic population. Like anybody who is not part of the fascist cult is then called a terrorist, and you have to be a capitalist now in the US. Like, are you a capitalist or not? I mean, I had someone literally demand to know if I'm a capitalist. I'm like, I'm pro Eisenhower, and Eisenhower had a 91% tax rate on the rich, if you want to call that. I mean, nobody would dare not call Eisenhower capitalist because he was very anti-communist. But nevertheless, not even the Democrats are calling for. I mean, Bernie Sanders has talked about a 91% tax rate on the rich, but yeah, the last time we had that was Eisenhower, and